Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to New Wave. I'm Rabia Mahmood. I'm here to speak about the future of human rights movement and the challenges to the global human rights movement as of now in 2026. And today we're going to be speaking about this with our friend and colleague Raza Rumi, who's joined us in the studio today. Hi.
Hi, Rabia. Well, good to be with you in the studio.
And after so long.
After a long time. And Rabia, you being this human rights defender, I know we were talking about this. Are you worried?
This is not a funny conversation at all. But I think we've come to this point in the world where we were previously worried and shocked, and now at this state where we must gear up and think about what's going to happen to the human rights movement, right? Yeah. Of course, I say this as a Pakistani and a South Asian and a Muslim woman who lives in a very complicated country in context of human rights, but also it's not just our country which is complicated when it comes to human rights, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's January 2026 and we have been seeing a genocide unfold in 4K on our phone screens, right? We've seen it, active genocide on our phone screen. And we've seen so much evidence of human rights violations, right? It's been officially declared a genocide by the UN and all of the bajillion human rights organizations and activists who work on this. And yet we are seeing multiple violations, not just by the country which was perpetrating this genocide, the West, which has been like the flag bearer of human rights. And funder of human rights movement and a funder of human rights sector and development and humanitarian causes across the world, right? And yet they have been funding this genocide as well, bankrolling it.
So you've
right?
nailed it, Rabia. That is exactly what is happening. After the Second World War, the international order and, with the rise of UN and creation of UN. Now the UN Charter explicitly mentions that one of the key purposes of the UN is to promote and preserve and protect human rights. Yeah. I mean, that's like in the first page, the second paragraph. I teach this every semester and my students are like, okay, you're teaching this, but what is happening in the world? Because they see Gaza and they see ICE and they see other things. And that particular order, obviously, as you rightly said, the United States and Western Europe, they took it upon themselves to promote that. So there was always this kind of East versus West, Soviet bloc versus Western bloc politics. But generally, there was a global consensus, declaration like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by so many new countries that came into being. Even in our Pakistani constitution, in the Indian constitution, you find all those rights. But now, enshrined, exactly. But what we are seeing after 80 years, that, that is coming down crashing. And of course, the leader, the United States, with the first Trump presidency, where Trump pulled the US out of Paris Agreement, this time the US is like pulling out of most UN agencies. WHO, for example, which is about health, public health is a right, vaccinations, fighting global pandemics, and which basically means that we are in this situation where the leading countries of Western Europe and America are themselves, either engaged or silent about widespread human rights violations, what we have learned over the years as human rights. And the rising powers like China, Russia, others do not really believe in human rights or the Western framework.
Yeah, Western framework, I would say.
Yeah, so
right?
they have their own idea, they have their own view. But, those are authoritarian regimes. And these ones are now de facto authoritarian regimes. I mean, they are de jure because there's just one, the way Putin gets re-elected, and the Chinese. I know you have a different view there. But what I'm trying to say is that everybody is basically, nobody really cares, okay? Civil liberties, habeas corpus, mass deportations being a state policy in the US.
There's so much to unpack here, which we don't have the time for,
Yeah.
right? So this is a more generalized concern, and we're trying to voice something that we usually just speak about on our WhatsApp groups with our friends, right? And of course, people have written about it, and you've spoken about the world order. It is a new world order, right? And now it's interesting how Germany was saying that the Trump is destroying the new world order,
Yeah.
and it's really wild to me. The German president is saying that when Germany has been like crushing all kinds of dissent and has been so punitive and towards
And supporting
protest.
Israel.
No, supporting Israel outside the country, but
Yeah.
in Berlin and elsewhere,
Hitting
some of
people,
the most
I mean,
brutal use of force against protesters. Everyone wants to talk about Iran, but no one wants to look at what Germany has been doing. What
Yeah.
Berlin has been doing, the
Yeah.
police there, the Dutch police, the US police, what they did to students.
Yeah.
You've mentioned
I
ICE.
witnessed, I
Yes,
lived through that era.
Yeah,
My
there-
students
there
were arrested. Can
on
you
the
imagine?
campuses, yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you're speaking about Trump, but that was the Biden era,
Yeah.
right? So it's not just Trump.
It's
I
not
know
just
Trump
Trump.
is just like
Yeah.
it's just everything is on acid, and Trump is more naked when it comes to the foreign policy being, or the local policy.
Yeah, he's more direct. I mean, he makes no
naked,
excuse.
not-
Yeah.
Yes, but I also want to raise what's happened, because you are from the US as well,
Yeah.
not just from Lahore, and what ICE has done to this, the incident in the US, the recent incident where this woman, a mother of a 6-year-old, was shot dead by an ICE operative.
Yes.
And it's just like extrajudicial killings, extrajudicial, disappearances, abductions, short-term disappearances, all of these things and detentions, everything incommunicado detentions, as we've seen.
Yeah.
Everything that we've been told happens in Latin America or in the Middle East or in South Asian countries, everything that we studied and documented and monitored as, like, for instance, I've done it as a human rights practitioner who's worked with local and international NGOs, and not just as a journalist, that we work on and think of all of our countries has been unfolding.
Yeah.
And elsewhere in the West, and this is specifically in the United States, right? So how do you see that?
So I think basically what the world map that you've drawn, in particular the US, I think that is exactly the kind of moment that we are locked in, because I think the hypocrisy of the Western world was always known to us, And let's say we are Pakistanis.
Yeah.
All 3 brutal dictatorships in Pakistan were supported by the US. The flag, the torchbearer of human rights, and the Western world. The UK was behind, the European countries were supporting all 3 generals who ruled Pakistan non-stop. Chile, I mean, the US supported Pinochet, the worst abuser in Latin America, who killed thousands of people, thousands disappeared. We don't even know where they are. We talk about missing persons in Pakistan all the time, but those cases are still unresolved. So we always knew that. But the way that this whole thing has unfolded towards the end and early part of 21st century is that this is not a tenable idea, or what we understand as the human rights movement is basically over. I mean, I read this op-ed by a Gen Z writer. It's all over in a Pakistani newspaper. I mean, I want to repeat that with regards to the human rights movement. Of course, we still have to struggle for it. We still have to maybe find a different language for it. But as far as the traditional model, where you have the UN agencies, like the United Nations Human Rights Council, like the International Criminal Court, and other bodies which are global bodies which oversee the implementation of human rights and adherence to it, and the watchdogs like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, basically, Human Rights Watch was effective because it had the ear of the U.S. administration, the State Department, and they could make some impact. That relationship is severed now, and I don't know much about Amnesty. Perhaps they too, but the U.S. is out of the Human Rights Council. It has issued warrants for the judges of International Criminal Court and the prosecutors. Now imagine an International Criminal Court is meant to punish those who abuse rights. And the world's greatest power, the superpower, says we're going to arrest these people if they enter the US. And Russia does not like the ICC. The Chinese don't like it. And ultimately, you have a body where no world power is supporting that. So the international human rights order is crumbling. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but it's also that, of course, the big question here is also like how can human rights, how can we ensure that human rights are a tool for justice and not a weapon that can be used by the states?
Of course,
right? That's the big question. And again, a very complicated issue. But like you're mentioning China, it's interesting because this is China for the past 40 years hasn't bombed a single country.
Yeah.
While advancing their own like sort of economy and uplifting its own people out of poverty, right? They might not have the absolute right to protest whenever they want to, but they have done things to help and uplift people out of poverty, which is like, again, a human rights concern as well. Human rights are not just civil political, it's also
economic
and social, right? So
this is, Rabia, this is a very good distinction you're drawing because this was there right from the Cold War times. If you know the International Covenant, the two major covenants on civil and political rights,
social, cultural rights,
and the economic, social and cultural rights, they were brought in by these two blocks. The US-led bloc said civil and political rights are the most important. The Soviets said, no, economic, social, and cultural rights are more important. So ultimately, both became treaties. And as we now see, they are the two sides of of one coin, or the fundamental, central to the human rights idea. So in a way, both these sides have been violating the half. So in the US, you don't have healthcare. For example, it's private healthcare. And healthcare, so if a person who does not have health insurance is likely to die of a serious disease because there's nobody, or if a person who's poor has no particular prospects. I mean, they could be on the streets, as you know, with hundreds and thousands of homeless people on the streets of America, which is often Chinese point out that issue. But in the case of China and prior to that, Soviet Union or other socialist countries, you have repressive tactics where civil rights are under attack. So you have the economic rights, housing, food, employment, healthcare, education, skill development. So I mean,
but now you see repression in the U.S. and elsewhere as well,
so
right?
now the U.S. is violating both, and
you
Germany you mentioned, UK.
And also you have another problem in the U.S. You have like this awful gun laws and quote-unquote domestic terrorism, you can call it. I mean, of course, the
right to life is not secure in the U.S. I mean, that's a fundamental, very basic right of every treaty, every international agreement is the right to life. So if you allow guns to be sold to kids or access to mentally unsound people, and they come into cinemas and malls and schools, the gun shootings in schools are crazy. They happen every other day. You hear about something somewhere in the heartland of America. A kid brings a gun, or a shooter comes into a college, and you have these violent, awful episodes. So, I mean, I guess what is happening is a very, very difficult and problematic moment because at least we had some standards. We had
a semblance of
so we had the Universal Declaration, we had all these treaties, missing persons, enforced disappearances, Convention Against Torture, child rights, women's rights, environmental rights, water, etc., climate change, Paris Agreement, right? Now, even those mean not much to the current US administration. So which creates an emergency situation.
But we're also speaking about the US and the West and its hypocrisy when it comes to the human rights issue, because what kind of precedent does it set for the rest of the world?
Yeah.
And because they have always used these as tools to demonize and control other countries and paint them with like this color that they are closed states, these are,
No,
authoritarian states, these are repressive states.
Take our case, Pakistan. Its allies, the US, the Saudis, the Chinese, all three authoritarian or semi or wannabe authoritarian states.
But
so in Pakistan also, Pakistan says, okay, check.
But we're doing well at the moment, internationally.
Internationally, diplomatically, we're doing well.
Yes.
That's for geopolitical and strategic reasons. But it empowers the Pakistani administration, whoever.
True.
This hybrid system we have.
True.
They say we can do anything in the country.
Are we in a hybrid 3.0 at the moment?
3.0, and so that's why you see a lot of protest rallies are suppressed. A lot of cases against. I mean, it was happening before as well, but this time there is no international condemnation. In fact, one of the opposition parties in Pakistan has been ironically trying to lobby the US for quote-unquote what? Human rights violations.
An intervention.
An intervention.
Into domestic political affairs.
Exactly. And for both, the US has shown zero interest.
Yeah, but this is interesting because there was a time when there was a resolution passed in the US Congress, and which was directed at Pakistan, that there's, democracy is at risk in Pakistan. So that also happened, which was
so
unheard
ironical
of. Yeah,
and so
but
crazy.
Not anymore. But it's interesting because, of course, let's bring this conversation to Pakistan a bit quickly, that we also live in this country where rights are not guarantees, right? And of course, people are poor. There are there are no basic services. Healthcare is a commodity. Education. So all of that, housing, big problems now. Climate, we're at the forefront of this. Of climate issue as well, and one of the top 10 countries in the world, which
top
is
three. In fact, they're saying
it
used to be top 10.
Impacted by the climate change. So there is that, and then there is a problem with Pakistan's ruling elite, which of course the military is part of, and at the same time, we also have problem with, terrorism, security concerns, the blasphemy issue and whatnot, right? And we live in a very hostile neighborhood.
Now, that's the other complication.
Yeah. And we have terrorism and extremism. And so, but the state counters terrorism and extremism and yet does so through extrajudicial means, right? And so, again, this conversation also needs to take place at home. How, again, can we ensure that people have
Adabia, this
justice,
is a global
there's
question.
Accountability.
Yeah.
And yet, it's not a weapon that one political party can use against the other political party and one faction of the Pakistan's establishment can use against others, right? Yeah.
No, but this is a global question about, security and terrorism or the hostile neighborhood that you said, where do you draw the line? Because, national security is always is a problem.
Yes.
Yeah, NatSec is always
cited as
gets into conflict with human rights. Now, after 9/11, so we are talking about the demise of international human rights order. It started almost quarter of a century
Demise
ago.
of the world order.
Yeah,
recently.
world order 2001. What did the US and UK do? They passed the most draconian laws. They could pick up anyone, keep them without any charges in detention.
Yeah.
The US set up the Guantanamo Bay. They used torture to extract. They put into place the world's largest surveillance system, using all sorts of technologies
and exporting these technologies to the rest of the world.
And then other countries said, okay, the US is doing that. India said, we are going to do it. Pakistan said, we'll do it. Israel was already working on that. So ultimately what we are seeing in this, the use of national security is a very tricky question, because there is an argument that in times of war or security threats, certain rights may get curtailed, okay? There's a theoretical argument. But who determines that?
Who determines that? Yeah.
And that is why you need some kind of a democratic input, some kind of a parliamentary input, because that's where people's representatives intervene. And so in the United States, in the UK, ultimately the Congress, the courts did, and in the Patriot Act was undone by the courts in the US. The Congress did question the executive. In Pakistan, it never happens. You can do anything in the northwest, of the country, in Waziristan. You can do anything in Balochistan in the name of national security, but nobody holds the executive accountable. How did you make that policy? Was the use of force appropriate or not? Things like that. So I guess that is ultimately comes down to accountability.
It does come down to accountability, but you're saying who sort of determines what, right? I mean, who also determines which state is authoritarian now anymore?
Yeah, that's
who
also true.
determines which state is fascist anymore? Because people are saying that the United States is descending into fascism now, right?
They're saying themselves.
None of it is funny.
We don't have to say.
Yeah, but we and of course
U.S. commentators, every other week there's a new book, Fascism in America or whatever.
Yeah,
so,
and the CIA and the former CIA directors and all these people are now actively saying, okay, let's change regime in Venezuela, let's go for or Iran, and coming out and admitting to it.
So I think what I see in the future is that the global civil society and the national civil societies will really have to reimagine their role in the coming decades, because the previous playbook is over.
I think we have to rethink and completely subvert this concept of human rights, right? Like, I mean, the way South Africa did when they took the case against Israel to ICJ, they led that, right? That's a subversion of what this tool was, a colonial tool, right?
Yeah.
And how some of these countries like Colombia and others had come together on the issue of Palestine. There's something that we can study maybe to learn how to...
Global South has to play a role, but even there, Rabia, there's a big problem, because one of the big actors of Global South, i.e. India, is also on the authoritarian path. Look at what is happening within India. Look at its blanket support of Israel. Look at its dehumanization of Pakistanis and Pakistan in May 2025. If India were to lead like the India that we knew, the secular, constitutional, democratic India were to lead this Global South movement, maybe things would be different today.
I don't think India can lead the movement.
No, it just can. But it's a big blow, because the second most populous country of the world, and it's a very rising economy, growing economy, and then China is very peculiar. They're very inward looking. They just want to keep their interests outside with BRI and all alive, but they're not into exporting this ideology or that ideology. So with India and China out of this, then we are left with, of course, Colombia, South Africa, and perhaps countries like Pakistan, middle powers, have a role, but Pakistan's own house is not in order at the moment, Pakistan is also facing a democratic decline.
True. I mean, the decline, like you're saying, India is on the authoritarian path. I feel like it's already there. And our democratic decline basically just happened, I think, a while back.
Yeah, back.
Yeah, but...
But it has become worse because things were improving. After 2008, and since the last dictator left, we had elections, we had regular governments coming in. They passed many laws.
A different era.
Yeah, made amendments. And then we had the military experiment in Pakistan with a populist leader and propped him up and brought him into power, who came in and curtailed all sorts of liberties. And ironically, today, he and his party are the torchbearers of human rights, because they feel that, their rights are being... Because when they were violating other groups' they were curtailing the role of civil society that was kosher. And now a lot of skepticism about the opposition in Pakistan now is that whether they actually believe in what they are arguing for, whether they actually believe in human rights or not. You see, that's or it's just
dilemma.
A weaponization.
No, it is a weaponization. I would say that's our dilemma, because that's what one party does when they are in opposition, right? Like, so it's this cycle we're stuck in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Raza. This ended up being mostly a conversation where we criticize the Western sort of supposed values when it comes to rights.
Yeah,
and
because
social
that's where the
justice.
crisis is.
That's where the crisis is. And speaking less about our countries, which I think we will speak about in our upcoming episodes. Thanks to everyone for watching. Khudafiz.